still waiting on word for my Z motor. I've got the X and the Y tuned, and so far it looks like the backlash is going to be minimal, if any. I'm sure there's some backlash, but my indicator only goes down to 1/1000th of an inch, so it's really close. I would say, if I had to guess, it's within 1/1000th, 2/1000ths of an inch as far as the backlash goes. And we'll get more into that in a later video after I get the Z motor and all. But right now, today, I'm working on trying to figure out my home switches. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the Z right here, like so, on the column. And then I'll just take a 1/2 inch plate and bolt it to the dovetail of the Z. And then as it goes up, it'll just hit the limit and trip it. And I'll put a bolt here and a bolt here so that it doesn't twist. And as far as adjustment, I'm thinking, this is just my experience, I've never adjusted these. Once I set them, I never go back and mess with them. On my X2, on the G0602, once I put it in place, I don't ever adjust it. And even if I were to have an adjustment, it's not really going to benefit me that much on the Z-axis. If I have an inch worth of adjustment, I'm not ever going to use that. So if you feel like you need an adjustment on this, you can always make a different type bracket. But for me, I'm just going to have it fixed. So let's get out to the mill and we'll get this thing bracket milled out. So I'm just starting out with a piece of 3/8 inch aluminum stock here. This is just scrap. So I'm just kind of cleaning up the edges. I've cut it to length. It's about 3 inches long and about an inch and a half wide, I think. Now right here I'm going to just drill some holes and then cut this little relief out. And this is so that once I bolt it to the Z dovetail, the part hanging over the column won't catch and rub. So I just got like a 1/16 of an inch recess here just to kind of make sure that it doesn't grab and rub. And then now I'm just flipped it over and bored 2 holes cross corner, just to make sure that it will not twist or flex. Okay, so we've got our little bracket made here, and you can see I just relieved this area right here, and then I've already marked it. Get that on the back side there. I've already marked it. It's going to sit like so. And then we'll just put a couple of screws through here and bolt it to this, and this will ride up and down. And then our limit switch is going to sit right here, and then it'll come up and hit it just like so. Doesn't take much to get this limit switch to move. And it'll look something like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to get these holes bored and tapped. I'm going to be using M4 socket head screws to bolt everything down. That should secure it just fine. Alright, so what I'm doing here is just putting a envelope up underneath the area that I'm going to be drilling, just so that I can try to keep some of the mess down to a minimum. I'm going to be drilling this with 9/64 drill bit, or a 3.5 millimeter. Be careful when I'm drilling this right here. This hole's okay, but this hole right here is actually drilling into the channel where the bolts slide around for the spindle. So it wasn't an issue, but it could cause you to break a bit depending on where your layout is. I'm just drilling the 4 mounting holes here. These are for the limit switch. The bottom one will go all the way through. This one will not, so be mindful of that. But the bottom 2 will go all the way through. And I'm just going about a 1/2 inch or so deep. These drill fairly easily. These castings are kind of coarse, so drilling's fairly easy. Alright, clean this off a little bit. You can see here that all the shavings were captured in the envelope, so now I'm just going back and tapping these holes with the M4 by 0.7 tap. Check the fit. Pretty good. Last one there. Tap the dovetail here, and be careful again on this one right here. It's going into the channel where the bolts for the spacer or for the spindle head all mount to. Alright, so now we can mount our bracket in place. Again, these are M4 0.7 by, these are 20 millimeter here. Nice and secure. And then for the limit switch, there's 2 different sizes. There's M4 by 30 millimeter long, and then the back ones are M4 by 20 millimeters. Gives you about a 1/2 inch sticking out the bottom of the limit switch, which is more than enough to secure this. Works good, actuates. Pretty satisfied with the overall limit switch there. What do you think? Looks pretty good to me. Alright guys, so now that we've got the Z-axis limit home switches set up, I want to set up the X. Now this is the back side of my X stepper motor mount. And so pretty straightforward and simple. What I thought I would do is just going to mount it like so. I need about 1/8 of an inch from here to where it's going to eventually stop, just for this to trigger. And this is just going to ride along as this goes in, and it will hit up against here. So again, I don't really need anything extra other than to just bolt this on, and I think that's going to work just fine. Remember, this portion of the stepper motor mount is going to go between the saddle here, and so that'll just hit up against here. Alright, so let's get that mounted. Alright, well, I've laid out the bottom hole here, and I'm drilling it. Again, these are M4s, so this is a 3.5 millimeter or a 9/64 drill bit. Tapping it here with the M4 by 0.7 tap. And I wanted to go ahead and get this one hole mounted and then kind of use it to make sure all the other holes line up. It seems like I'm always getting one hole not quite right, so this is the simplest, easiest way to do that. Just go ahead and mount it, get a couple screws in there, and then I can kind of mark the other hole locations and finish drilling those up. Now these screws here, they don't actually interfere with anything on the inside. Once it's bolted on, they barely do protrude through the square tubing, so worked out really nice and made for a simple, easy installation, and I don't have to worry about fabricating any kind of brackets for the X here. Alright, got all the holes drilled and tapped. These are again M4, and these are 20 millimeters. Need two 20 millimeter and two 30 millimeter in length. And these are socket head cap screws. Alright, turned out pretty good. I'm gonna have to try to figure out how to get all these wires secured, but alright, we got the X home switch set up. It's just gonna go in and hit up against the saddle. Again, not really too concerned about adjustment. If I need to, I can always add a bolt there or something. Now, the X-axis is a little bit of a different situation, and it's a little bit more complicated. A couple of reasons. I need to have the switch. There's actually going to be a 1/2 inch gap here where this comes back. It's actually a 1/2 inch from the column here, or 1 inch from the column. What I'm thinking is some kind of angle bracket here and have this sit like so. These are supposed to be moisture resistant, and there is a gasket all the way around here, so we'll see. They're very inexpensive, so if there's an issue I can always pick up another. So what I'm going to do now is just make me some kind of bracketry, so let's get started doing that. Now, to make your life a lot easier, you can just purchase some 1.5" aluminum angle. I did not have any, but I did have some 2-inch square tubing, so I decided, hey, let's just I'll just make myself a angle bracket. This is 1/4 inch wall square tubing, so I just cut it to length. It's 3 inches long, and I'm just cleaning up the edges here on the X2. And then what I'm doing now is I'm just going to go down and about 1/4 inch and just kind of cut it into 2 pieces here. So 1/4 inch wide and 1/4 inch deep. Now right now I just kind of got it clamped in there, and then as you can see, I flipped it around and started on the other side, and I realized that it's going to come loose at some point when I get deep enough, so I had to kind of readjust, and I put me a little scrap piece in there so that I'm pressing on the actual bottom, and it just popped right off. So there we go, we got our angle bracket, and now I've just laid out for my limit switch, and I am drilling the 4 holes here. And again, these are M4 by 0.7. I'm drilling, tapping these holes. And for this last hole, I'm going to go ahead and fasten a couple of these screws, and then I'll drill this last hole. And again, these are 20 millimeter and 30 millimeter in length. Now, to mount it to the mill, I decided to put in a couple of slots, because of that 1-inch gap there, I wanted to make sure I had some room to actually adjust it. And with the y-axis, I want to make sure I get as much travel as possible. So I thought it would be best to have this one adjustable. So I just stuck it in the mill here and cut a couple of slots with a 3/16 inch 2-flute end mill. And then I rounded off and cleaned up all the edges just with a file. So there's the finished bracket. And give me about 1 inch, 3/4 inch of adjustment there. So now I went out to the mill and I laid it out, and I'm drilling these holes again, M4s. You need to be careful on this front hole because it's right where the bolt location is for the column to bolt to the base. I didn't want to drill all the way through it and kind of weaken it, so I only went as deep as I needed to. Just to get the bracket mounted. Alright, tapping them here. And once I get them tapped, go ahead and get all this area vacuumed up. And now we can go ahead and mount our bracket. I think that's going to give me plenty of adjustment there. And then now I'll mount my limit switch. Same bolts here, 30mm and 20mm. Alright, so you can see how it kind of overhangs in front of the column there, and it's going to come back and just touch it there. So let's get it back as far as it'll go and get it adjusted. And we can come back and tweak it if we need to. Alright, that looks pretty good right there. Let's give it a test run. We'll do a reference y-axis here. You can see it goes back, bumps, and comes off. Now, one thing that's nice about these limit switches is they're mechanical, so you can actually hear them click. And they're actually pretty loud, so it works out pretty good. Here's the x-axis, referencing it. You can see how it's going to go and hit the saddle and come back. Wraps up the video on our home switch installation. I tried to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible with minimal bracketry. As far as these limit switches and repeatability, only time will tell. We'll do some tests on them once we get the mill up and running. If you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to comment. Thumbs up if you like the video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and most importantly, be safe.